They found Mikhail's body 3 days ago. The search and rescue team said his injuries were incompatible with life. His rib cage crushed from the inside out, eyes frozen open in terror, tongue missing. The official report will probably say exposure or an animal attack. That's what they always say. But I know the truth. I was there with him on Kholat Syakhl, the mountain of the dead. And I know what happens when you break the rules. The authorities have been calling me non-stop. They want to know why 2 experienced hikers went up into the Ural Mountains in February, why only one came back, and why I'm now barricaded in my apartment in Yekaterinburg with a shotgun across my lap. They're knocking again now, harder this time. The door won't hold much longer. Before they take me, I need to record what happened, perhaps as a warning, though I doubt anyone will believe me. The same way no one believed what really happened to those 9 students in 1959. I understand now why the investigation was shut down, why so much was classified. Some truths are better left buried in the snow. 2 weeks ago, Mikhail and I set out to hike the Dyatlov Pass. He was obsessed with the incident. 9 experienced hikers found dead under mysterious circumstances, their tent cut open from the inside, bodies scattered half-dressed in the snow, some with inexplicable internal injuries, some with radiation traces on their clothes. The official explanation was an unknown compelling force, which explained nothing at all. "It's the 66th anniversary," Mikhail had said, his eyes gleaming with the same excitement I'd seen since we were kids growing up together in Vizhai. "We have to go. For the documentary." I should have said no. I should have listened to the old man at the last outpost in Vizhai. He grabbed my arm as we were loading our backpacks into the snowmobile. "If you must go to that cursed place," he whispered, his breath reeking of Samogon, "there are rules. 9 rules for the 9 who died. Break them, and you'll be the 10th. He pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. Mikhail laughed it off as superstition, the ramblings of a drunk. But I kept the paper. I only wish I'd made Mikhail follow the rules too. The hammering at my door is getting louder. I think they're bringing in something to break it down. It doesn't matter. What's outside my door isn't what I'm afraid of, because I broke a rule too, just one. And now something followed me home from the mountain. I can hear it scratching at my window 60 floors up. I can see its breath fogging the glass. Let me tell you what happened at Dyatlov Pass. Let me tell you about the rules. Hello, viewers. If you wish your stories or experiences to be narrated by me, share them on our own subreddit, which you can join from the description below. I will pick the stories from the community and narrate them, and every once in a while, we will host a 3-hour story compilation. The journey to Dyatlov Pass began innocently enough. Mikhail picked me up before sunrise, his ancient UAZ 452 van loaded with our gear. We'd been planning this trip for months, or rather, Mikhail had been planning while I reluctantly agreed. As a freelance photographer, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to capture the haunting beauty of the northern Urals in winter, even if I thought Mikhail's documentary about the Dyatlov Pass incident was becoming an unhealthy obsession. "Anton, this will make our careers," Mikhail said, drumming his gloved fingers against the steering wheel as we drove out of Yekaterinburg. The city's industrial skyline slowly faded behind us, replaced by endless white forests. 66 years is significant. Numbers have power in the Mansi traditions. I nodded, watching my breath fog in the cold air despite the van's heater working overtime. Mikhail had spent the last year interviewing everyone from surviving relatives of the Dyatlov group to Mansi elders. The indigenous Mansi people had warned the original hikers away from the mountain they called Kholat Syakhl, the mountain of the dead. Now they refuse to guide anyone there, especially in winter. The ride to Vijay took us nearly 8 hours, the last town before civilization gave way completely to the wilderness of the Urals. It's a different place than it was in 1959. Smaller, more dilapidated since the mine closed. The few residents who remain cling to the edges of a dying settlement. We stopped at the only place still serving food, a small tavern with a peeling sign reading Taiga. Inside, a handful of weather-beaten locals eyed us with the immediate recognition that we were outsiders. "You're going to the pass," the bartender said. It wasn't a question. He set down 2 bowls of steaming uka, fish soup that smelled better than anything I'd eaten in months. "For a documentary," Mikhail confirmed proudly, pulling out his camera as if to prove our intentions were legitimate. The bartender, Stepan according to his name tag, shook his head. "Every few years, someone gets the same idea. Not all come back." "Those are just stories," Mikhail said, spooning soup into his mouth. "Like the 9 students were just stories?" Stepan asked, his weathered face impassive. I fingered the folded paper in my pocket, the one with the rules. I hadn't shown it to Mikhail yet. Part of me thought it was nonsense, but something in the old man's eyes when he'd given it to me had stirred an ancient fear in my gut. "We've got modern equipment," I said, trying to reassure myself as much as anyone. "GPS, satellite phone, emergency beacon." Stepan grunted. "Those things don't work right up there, never have." After we finished eating, we arranged for a local to take us by snowmobile to the trailhead the next morning. The snow was too deep for the van. We took a room above the tavern, the only accommodation in Vijay, and spent the evening reviewing our route and equipment. That night, while Mikhail showered, I finally unfolded the paper. The 9 rules of Dyatlov Pass. 1. Make camp before sunset. Once night falls, remain in your tent until dawn, no matter what you hear or see. 2. Never separate from your group. If you become separated, do not call out for others. They will not hear your real voice. 3. If you hear singing or music, cover your ears immediately. Do not try to find the source. 4. Do not take photographs of the northern lights if they appear. Do not look directly at them for more than a few seconds. 5. If you find any object that does not belong to you, especially anything metallic or with writing in a language you don't recognize, do not touch it. 6. If temperatures rise suddenly or unexpectedly, do not remove your clothes, no matter how unbearably hot it becomes. 7. If you feel you are being watched, you are. Do not search for observers. Do not acknowledge their presence. 8. If you notice footprints that don't belong to your group, do not follow them, even if they seem to lead to safety. 9. If you survive until the final day, leave before noon. What comes down the mountain after noon is not what went up. The paper trembled in my hands. I wanted to dismiss it as superstitious nonsense, but something about the precision of the rules, their strange specificity, made my skin crawl. When Mikhail emerged from the bathroom, I quickly folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. "We should get some sleep," I said. "Early start tomorrow." "I can't sleep," Mikhail replied, his eyes bright with excitement. "I've waited my whole life for this, Anton, to solve the mystery that no one else could." I watched him checking his camera equipment with meticulous care and felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to call the whole thing off, to invent some emergency that would take us back to Yekaterinburg. Instead, I said nothing and tried to ignore the growing knot of dread in my stomach. Outside our window, snow began to fall in thick, silent flakes. From somewhere deep in the surrounding forest came a sound, too rhythmic to be the wind, too structured to be an animal. It almost sounded like singing. Morning came with brutal cold and an impenetrable silence. The temperature read -30 degrees Celsius on my watch's thermometer as we loaded our gear onto the 2 snowmobiles waiting outside the tavern. Our driver, Nikolai, was a grizzled man in his 60s who spoke little but seemed to know the terrain intimately. "You follow the old route?" he asked, securing our equipment. "As close as possible," Mikhail confirmed. "We want to retrace their steps exactly." Nikolai's expression didn't change, but I noticed his movements became more deliberate, almost reverent. "I will take you to Auspia River. From there, you must go on foot, up to the pass." The journey by snowmobile took 3 hours, cutting through pristine forests and across frozen expanses of white. The landscape had an unsettling beauty, untouched, ancient, indifferent to human presence. Occasionally, Nikolai would point to landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, the remnants of an old Mansi hunting camp, the mountain range looming ever closer. When we reached our drop-off point at the Auspia River, Nikolai helped us unload our equipment and prepare our packs. 4 hours to where you want to camp, he said, pointing toward the slope that would eventually lead us to the pass. Weather report says storm coming tomorrow night. You should be back here in 3 days, yes? That's the plan, I said, adjusting my heavy backpack. Nikolai nodded, then unexpectedly grabbed my arm, much like the old man had done the day before. The Mansi do not come here in winter, he said quietly. Not for generations. You understand? Before I could respond, Mikhail called out, already starting up the trail. I thanked Nikolai and hurried to catch up, the weight of my pack settling uncomfortably on my shoulders. The climb was strenuous, but manageable. Both Mikhail and I were experienced hikers, and despite the extreme cold, the clear weather made navigation simple. As we ascended, I found myself repeatedly checking the sky, watching as the crystal blue gradually deepened. We needed to make camp before sunset. Rule number 1. We should start looking for a campsite, I said, glancing at my watch. It'll be dark in about 2 hours. Mikhail gestured ahead. Just a bit further. I want to reach the tree line before setting up. Better footage. I wanted to argue, but found myself following silently. The rules echoed in my mind. Make camp before sunset. Once night falls, remain in your tent until dawn, no matter what you hear or see. We reached a suitable clearing just as the light began to fade from the sky. Working quickly, we erected our tent, a modern, high-tech version nothing like the simple canvas the Dyatlov group had used. The original 9 had cut their way out of their tent in terror. What had they seen? What had they heard? As Mikhail set up his camera equipment to capture the sunset over the mountain range, I pulled out the paper and reread the rules. Should I show them to him? Would he even take them seriously? Anton, check this out, Mikhail called. I walked over to where he stood, filming the landscape. The setting sun painted the snow in shades of deep orange and crimson, almost like bloodstains across the white terrain. Beautiful, isn't it? He said without looking away from his viewfinder. Yes, I agreed, though beautiful wasn't the word I would have chosen. Ominous, perhaps. Foreboding. As the light continued to fade, we finished setting up camp, melted snow for water, and prepared a simple meal of freeze-dried stew on our portable stove. Tomorrow we'll reach the actual pass, Mikhail said between mouthfuls. I want to find the exact location where they made their final camp. I nodded, watching as the stars began to appear overhead. We should get inside. It's getting colder. Just a few more minutes, Mikhail said, setting up his camera on a tripod outside the tent. The night sky here is incredible for time-lapse photography. A sudden unease gripped me. I think we should both get in the tent now, I said more firmly. Mikhail gave me a curious look. What's going on with you? You've been on edge since Vijay. I hesitated, then pulled out the folded paper. An old man gave me this before we left. Rules for the mountain. Mikhail took the paper and read it, his expression shifting from curiosity to amusement. Seriously? You're worried about some superstitious nonsense? The first rule says to stay in your tent after dark, I pointed out. Mikhail laughed. And the fourth rule says not to photograph the northern lights. I'll be sure to follow that one. He handed the paper back to me. People have been creating myths about this place since '59. It's how they process the unexplainable. Just humor me, I said. Let's both get inside. With an exaggerated sigh, Mikhail grabbed his camera. Fine, but I'm setting an alarm to come out for the midnight shot. The stars will be incredible then. Inside the tent, we settled into our sleeping bags, the compact space quickly warming from our body heat. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering across the taut fabric of our shelter. Mikhail fell asleep almost immediately, but I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the mountain. It was sometime after midnight when I heard it, a soft, melodic humming from somewhere beyond our camp. My first thought was that it must be the wind through the nearby trees, but there was a pattern to it, a deliberate rise and fall of notes. Rule 3 echoed in my mind. If you hear singing or music, cover your ears immediately. Do not try to find the source. I pressed my hands over my ears, heart pounding. Beside me, Mikhail stirred. What are you doing? He mumbled sleepily. Nothing, I whispered. Go back to sleep. But Mikhail was already sitting up, reaching for the zipper of the tent. Did you hear that? Sounds like someone's out there. I grabbed his arm. Don't open the tent. Anton, if someone else is out here, they might need help. It's 20 below zero. It's not a person, I insisted, though I had no proof of this. Just a deep, primal certainty that whatever was making that sound was not human. Mikhail stared at me for a long moment, then slowly moved away from the tent entrance. You're really spooked by this place, aren't you? The humming grew louder, more distinct, a haunting melody that seemed to resonate from multiple directions at once. Mikhail heard it too. I could see the recognition in his eyes. That's weird, he admitted. Cover your ears, I told him. Don't listen to it. Surprisingly, he complied, perhaps finally sensing my genuine fear. We sat like that, hands pressed to our ears, for what felt like hours. Eventually, the melody faded, replaced by the ordinary sounds of the night wind. When I finally lowered my hands, Mikhail was staring at me. Tomorrow, he said quietly. I think you should tell me more about these rules. I nodded, relief washing over me. But as I settled back into my sleeping bag, a new sound emerged from the darkness outside, the distinct crunch of footsteps in the snow circling our tent. Mikhail heard it too. His eyes met mine, wide with the first real fear I'd seen in him since we began this journey. The footsteps continued their slow circuit around our shelter, not the four-legged pattern of an animal, the deliberate stride of something walking upright. We remained frozen, barely breathing, as the footsteps completed one circuit, then began another, and another. Rule number 7. If you feel you are being watched, you are. Do not search for observers. Do not acknowledge their presence. Somewhere in the distance, the humming began again. Neither of us slept after that. We sat in tense silence, listening as the footsteps continued their methodical circuit of our tent for what seemed like hours before finally fading away just before dawn. The singing had stopped too, leaving only the wind's hollow moan across the mountainside. When the first gray light seeped through the tent fabric, Mikhail unzipped the entrance with trembling hands and peered out. "Anything?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the dry tent air. He shook his head, then crawled outside. I followed, every muscle stiff from the night spent frozen in fear. The morning was brutally cold, the temperature having dropped further overnight. My beard was crusted with ice from my breath. The pristine snow around our tent told its own story. A single set of tracks circled our shelter, perfect impressions of bare human feet that somehow hadn't filled with drifting snow during the night. But the tracks made no sense. They formed a perfect circle around our tent, with no path leading toward or away from it. As if whatever made them had descended from above and then ascended the same way. Mikhail photographed the footprints from every angle, his filmmaker's instincts overriding his fear. "This is impossible," he muttered, kneeling to examine one print more closely. "These are bare feet, Anton. In this temperature, frostbite would set in within minutes." I said nothing, just stared at the unnatural circle. Rule 8 flickered through my mind. If you notice footprints that don't belong to your group, do not follow them, even if they seem to lead to safety. "We need to talk about the rules," I said as we dismantled our camp, the rising sun doing little to dispel the bone-deep cold. Mikhail nodded, his earlier skepticism gone. "That singing wasn't natural. And these footprints?" He trailed off, eyes scanning the horizon nervously. I explained each rule again as we hiked, climbing steadily toward the actual Dyatlov Pass. The rocky slope grew steeper, the air thinner. Mikhail listened intently, asking questions, no longer dismissing the warnings as superstition. "So we just follow these rules and we'll be safe?" he asked, his breath fogging heavily in the frigid air. "That's the theory," I replied, though I wasn't convinced it would be that simple. Something about this place felt fundamentally wrong, as if we were trespassing not just on forbidden ground, but in some liminal space where natural laws began to fray. By midday, we reached the area where the original Dyatlov group had made their final camp. A simple memorial stone marked the spot, placed there by later expeditions. Weathered photographs of the 9 students were affixed to the stone, their young faces staring out from a time long past. Mikhail knelt before the memorial, his camera forgotten for the moment. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Rustam Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonishenko, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Semyon Zolotaryov. He recited their names with reverence. "What happened to you?" I stood back, scanning our surroundings. The place had a desolate beauty, a sweeping view of the mountain range, the valley below blanketed in snow. But there was something else, a heaviness to the air, as if the tragedy that occurred here still echoed through time. "We'll set up camp here," Mikhail announced, shrugging off his backpack. "This is perfect for the documentary. I want to film the same view they would have had, capture the sunset and sunrise from this exact spot." Unease prickled along my spine. "I don't think we should stay here." "This is literally why we came, Anton," Mikhail argued, already unpacking his tent. "We're documenting the Dyatlov incident on its anniversary, at the exact location." "There's something wrong with this place," I insisted. "We should make camp further down, somewhere less exposed." Mikhail stood, frustration evident in his stance. "The rules don't say anything about not camping here. They just say to make camp before sunset, which we will." He was right, technically. And yet, standing in the shadow of that memorial stone, I couldn't shake the feeling that camping here was inviting whatever horror had befallen the original 9. With reluctance, I helped Mikhail set up our tent. As we worked, he engaged in a running monologue about the original incident, theories about what happened, details he'd learned from his research. His passion for the mystery had returned now that daylight had restored some sense of normalcy. "The official investigation cited an unknown compelling force," he said, hammering a tent stake into the frozen ground. "Some people think it was an avalanche, but that doesn't explain why they cut their way out, or why they fled without proper clothing, or the internal injuries without external trauma." I grunted in acknowledgement, scanning the horizon. The sky was clear, a deep crystalline blue that promised another bitterly cold night. No sign of the storm Nikolai had mentioned. "Others blame Soviet military testing or infrasound causing panic," Mikhail continued. "But I think—" He stopped suddenly, staring at something behind me. I turned to follow his gaze and felt my breath catch. About 50 meters from our camp, half buried in snow, was a metallic object glinting in the sunlight. It was cylindrical, roughly the size of a thermos, with strange markings etched along its surface. Rule 5. If you find any object that does not belong to you, especially anything metallic or with writing in a language you don't recognize, do not touch it. "What is that?" Mikhail asked, already moving toward it. I grabbed his arm. "Don't. Rule 5. He hesitated, glancing between me and the object. "It could be evidence, Anton. Something that explains what happened here. Or it could be what caused it," I countered. Mikhail pulled away from my grip. "I'm just going to photograph it. I won't touch it." Before I could protest further, he was trudging through the snow toward the object, camera in hand. I followed reluctantly, torn between keeping to the rules and not separating from my friend. The object was even stranger up close. The markings weren't in any alphabet I recognized. Not Cyrillic, not Latin, not anything human. They seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles, rearranging themselves in subtle ways that made my eyes hurt. Mikhail crouched nearby, photographing it from every angle. "This is incredible," he murmured. "It looks almost like—" "Wait." He leaned closer, squinting at the markings. "I think I can almost read this." "Don't," I warned, a cold dread seeping through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Let's go back to camp." But Mikhail was transfixed, staring at the markings as if hypnotized. "They're changing," he whispered, adapting to be understood. I pulled at his jacket. "Mikhail, now." With visible effort, he tore his gaze away from the object. His pupils were dilated, his breathing shallow. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice unnaturally high. "The writing, it was communicating." "We're going back to camp," I said firmly, guiding him away from the object. He allowed himself to be led, but kept looking back over his shoulder. By the time we returned to our tent, Mikhail seemed more like himself, though he remained unusually quiet as we finished setting up camp and prepared an early dinner. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of amber and crimson. "I think we should leave tomorrow," I said as we ate our rehydrated meals. "Cut the trip short." Mikhail nodded slowly, staring into the distance. "I feel strange," he admitted. "Ever since looking at that thing, like something's in my head, scratching to get out." A tendril of fear curled around my heart. "Try to sleep. We'll head back at first light." As darkness fell, we retreated to our tent as per Rule 1. Inside, Mikhail tossed restlessly in his sleeping bag while I checked our supplies for the return journey. "It's so hot," he complained suddenly, sitting up and unzipping his jacket. I frowned. The temperature outside was plummeting with nightfall, well below -30 degrees Celsius now. Inside the tent was warmer, but still cold enough that our breath frosted in the air. "It's freezing, Mikhail," I said, watching with growing alarm as he began stripping off layers. "No, it's burning," he insisted, his face flushed. "Can't you feel it? Like a furnace in here?" Rule 6 flashed in my mind. If temperatures rise suddenly or unexpectedly, do not remove your clothes, no matter how unbearably hot it becomes. "Keep your clothes on," I said, grabbing his hands as he attempted to remove his thermal shirt. "It's not really hot. It's whatever you saw at that object. It's affecting your perception." "Let go!" he snarled, shoving me with unexpected strength. "I'm burning alive." He was radiating heat now. I could feel it through his clothes. His skin was red, beaded with sweat despite the cold. This wasn't just a delusion. Something was physically happening to him. "Mikhail, listen to me," I pleaded. "This is exactly what happened to the Dyatlov group. They were found partially undressed in the snow. Whatever made them feel overheated is happening to you now." For a moment, clarity seemed to return to his eyes. "The rules," he whispered. "Stay dressed. Stay in the tent." "That's right," I encouraged. "Just hold on. It'll pass." But even as I spoke, a new sound emerged from outside. That same haunting melody we'd heard the previous night, but closer now, more insistent. Mikhail's head snapped toward the tent entrance, his eyes widening. "They're calling me," he whispered. "They want me to come out." "Don't listen to it," I said, gripping Mikhail's shoulders. His skin burned against my hands. "Cover your ears." But Mikhail wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on the tent entrance, head tilted as if straining to catch every note of that unearthly melody. Sweat poured down his flushed face despite the freezing temperature. "It's so beautiful," he murmured. "Can't you hear it? They're singing my name." I couldn't make out words in the melody, just a haunting rhythmic series of notes that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly inside my skull. I pressed my hands over my ears, remembering Rule 3, but Mikhail made no move to block out the sound. "They found something up here," he continued, his voice taking on a dreamy quality. "The 9. They saw it too. That's why they had to leave." "Mikhail, snap out of it," I hissed, shaking him. "Whatever's out there, it's not human." His eyes refocused on me briefly. "I know," he said, and smiled. The expression chilled me more than the Arctic air. "That's what makes it so incredible. Don't you see? This is what we came for. Proof of something beyond." Before I could stop him, he lunged for the tent zipper and tore it open. Frigid air rushed in, along with the full force of that terrible singing. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, above, below, all around us. A chorus of voices that no human throat could produce. I grabbed Mikhail's jacket, trying to pull him back, but he shoved me away with unnatural strength. "They're waiting," he said, crawling out into the darkness. Rule number 2. Never separate from your group. If you become separated, do not call out for others. They will not hear your real voice. I had a split-second decision to make. Stay in the tent as Rule 1 dictated, or follow Mikhail and risk whatever waited in the darkness. I chose Mikhail. Outside, the night was clear and brutally cold, the stars painfully bright overhead. Mikhail stood a few meters from the tent, his head thrown back, arms outstretched as if in worship. He'd removed his jacket and gloves despite the killing cold, his breath steaming in great clouds around his head. "Mikhail," I called, keeping my voice low. "Come back to the tent." He didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. Instead, he began walking away from camp, his movements stiff and jerky, like a marionette controlled by unskilled hands. I followed, cursing under my breath, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The memorial stone loomed dark against the starlit snow as we passed it, the faces of the dead watching our passage with frozen expressions. The singing grew louder as we approached the ridge where we'd found the metal object earlier. But the object was gone. In its place was a soft blue glow emanating from the snow, as if something beneath the surface was illuminated. Mikhail stopped at the edge of the glow, swaying slightly on his feet. I caught up to him, grabbed his arm. "We need to go back," I urged, but his skin was burning now, impossibly hot in the sub-zero air. Steam actually rose from his exposed flesh. "They're coming through," he whispered, staring at the blue glow. "They've always been coming through, ever since 1959. But they need openings, doors, people to invite them." The snow around the blue light began to shift and bulge, as if something beneath was pushing upward. The singing changed pitch, becoming more urgent, more insistent. "What's happening?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. Mikhail turned to look at me, his eyes reflecting the blue light in a way that made them seem to glow from within. "The radiation," he said, as if this explained everything. "That's why there were traces on their clothes. The tear between worlds leaves residue." The snow erupted upward, revealing not ground beneath, but a swirling vortex of blue-white light. The singing now was almost deafening, the cold so intense it burned my lungs with each breath. And rising from that impossible portal, a figure began to take shape. It was vaguely humanoid, tall and thin, its body seeming to flicker in and out of existence. Where a face should have been was only a blank expanse of rippling, translucent tissue. It reached toward Mikhail with elongated fingers that ended in points too sharp to be called hands. "Beautiful," Mikhail breathed, stepping toward it. Terror finally broke my paralysis. I lunged forward, tackling Mikhail away from the creature and the portal. We tumbled through the snow, rolling downhill several meters before coming to a stop against a rocky outcropping. The creature let out a sound, not a scream, nothing so human, more like the discordant screech of metal tearing, amplified to impossible volume. The noise cut through my head like shards of glass, and I clasped my hands over my ears, feeling warm blood seeping between my fingers. Mikhail thrashed beneath me, trying to return to the portal. "Let me go," he snarled, his voice overlaid with a strange harmonic, as if multiple voices were speaking through him at once. "They've waited so long." "That thing will kill you," I shouted, struggling to restrain him. "No," he said, suddenly going still. "They don't want to kill. They want to wear, like clothes. They've been so cold, trapped between, for so long." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. I looked back toward the portal. The creature was moving toward us, its movements jerky and unnatural, like stop-motion animation played at the wrong speed. Behind it, more figures were emerging from the swirling light. "Run!" I urged, pulling Mikhail to his feet. "We need to run!" For a moment he resisted, staring longingly at the approaching entities. Then something seemed to clear in his eyes. Fear replaced the rapture on his face. "Oh God," he whispered. "What are those things?" "Run!" I repeated, shoving him ahead of me down the slope. We stumbled through deep snow, half running, half falling down the mountainside away from our camp, away from the portal and the creatures emerging from it. Behind us, that terrible screeching continued, accompanied by the sound of pursuit. Too many footsteps, moving too quickly through the snow. Rule number 8. If you notice footprints that don't belong to your group, do not follow them, even if they seem to lead to safety. As we fled, I became aware of tracks in the snow ahead of us. human footprints leading away from the mountain. In the starlight, they seemed to glow faintly, an inviting path to safety. "This way," Mikhail gasped, veering to follow the tracks. "No!" I grabbed his arm, yanking him away from the trail. "Rule 8, don't follow strange footprints." He resisted for a moment, then nodded, his breathing ragged. We changed direction, forging our own path through the deep snow. It was exhausting, each step requiring immense effort, but the sounds of pursuit seemed to fade slightly as we avoided the marked trail. We reached a stand of stunted pines, the first trees we'd seen since climbing above the tree line earlier. Without discussing it, we dove into the cover they provided, pressing ourselves against the rough trunks, gasping for breath in the thin air. "What's happening?" Mikhail whispered, shivering violently now that the unnatural heat had left him. His exposed skin was showing signs of frostbite already, the flesh waxy and pale. "We need to get you warm," I said, shrugging off my outer jacket and wrapping it around him. "And we need to get off this mountain." "The equipment," he said, teeth chattering. "Our supplies are back there with those things," I finished grimly. "We go down, get to the tree line, try to make it back to the extraction point. Nikolai said 4 hours up, so maybe 3 down if we push it." Mikhail nodded, but his eyes were unfocused, his movements sluggish. Early hypothermia, combined with the effects of whatever had influenced him near the portal. I needed to get him moving again before the cold claimed him. "Listen," I said, gripping his shoulders. "We're going to survive this. We're going to follow the remaining rules and get off this mountain alive. Understand?" He nodded again, more purposefully this time. But then his gaze shifted to something over my shoulder, and his eyes widened in renewed terror. "Anton," he whispered, "don't turn around. But I think they found us." Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to face the threat. But Mikhail's terrified expression told me everything I needed to know. Something was behind me, close enough that I could feel a subtle shift in the air, a presence that seemed to distort the space around it. "When I say run," I whispered, "go downhill as fast as you can. Don't look back." Mikhail gave an almost imperceptible nod, his eyes fixed on whatever stood behind me. I could hear it now, a soft, wet sound like meat being tenderized, punctuated by clicks that reminded me of insect mandibles. "Run!" I shouted, shoving Mikhail ahead of me. We burst from the cover of the trees, plunging through the deep snow. Behind us came that terrible screeching again, followed by the sound of pursuit, too fast, too fluid for anything moving through snow. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. 3 of the entities were flowing across the snow, their movements all wrong, bodies rippling and distorting as if they weren't fully solid. They left no footprints, instead gliding over the surface like oil on water. "Don't look," I gasped, facing forward again. "Just run." We stumbled downhill, gravity aiding our flight, sometimes running, sometimes sliding uncontrollably. My lungs burned in the frigid air, each breath a knife in my chest. Beside me, Mikhail wheezed painfully, his earlier exposure taking its toll. The tree line appeared ahead, the denser forest that would provide more cover, more obstacles between us and our pursuers. If we could reach it, perhaps we could lose them among the trees. As we ran, the sky above began to ripple with waves of green and blue light, the aurora borealis unfurling across the night sky in breathtaking luminescence. Under any other circumstances, I would have stopped to marvel at the display. But Rule 4 came to mind. Do not take photographs of the northern lights if they appear. Do not look directly at them for more than a few seconds. "Don't look at the lights," I called to Mikhail. Too late. He had already slowed, his head tilted back, eyes fixed on the dancing colors above. "It's them," he murmured. "It's their true form." I grabbed his arm, trying to drag him forward, but he resisted, transfixed by the aurora. The lights seemed to pulsate in time with that unearthly singing, which had started again, more distant but no less compelling. "Mikhail, we have to keep moving," I pleaded. He lowered his gaze reluctantly, but something had changed in his eyes. They reflected the aurora's glow even though he was no longer looking at it, tiny points of green-blue light dancing in his pupils. "They're ancient, Anton," he said, his voice eerily calm. "They were here before us. They'll be here after. They just want to understand." "Understand what?" I asked, pulling him forward even as I kept my own gaze firmly on the ground ahead. "What it's like to be solid, to be warm." His voice took on that layered quality again, as if multiple speakers were using his vocal cords simultaneously. "They've been watching us for so long. Sometimes they reach through, try to touch. But it's so cold here for them. They need vessels." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. "You're not yourself," I said. "It's the lights. They're affecting your mind." We'd reached the tree line now, the dense forest offering some protection from both the aurora above and the entities behind us. I led Mikhail deeper among the trees, the snow shallower here, our progress faster. "I feel them in my head," Mikhail said, pressing his palms against his temples. "Scratching, whispering, so many voices." "Fight it," I urged. "Focus on getting down the mountain." We continued our descent, the forest growing denser around us. The singing had faded, but occasionally I would catch glimpses of blue-white light filtering between the trees behind us, suggesting our pursuers hadn't given up. After what seemed like hours of stumbling through the dark forest, we reached a small clearing with what looked like a structure of some kind at its center. Drawing closer, I realized it was an old wooden hunter's cabin, half collapsed under the weight of snow on its roof. "We can rest there," I said, pointing. "Maybe find something useful." Mikhail nodded weakly. His condition was deteriorating. The combination of exposure, exertion, and whatever influence the lights had on him taking its toll. His movements were becoming uncoordinated. His breathing labored. The cabin was in poor shape, one wall partially collapsed, the roof sagging dangerously. But it offered some shelter from the wind and concealment from our pursuers. I helped Mikhail inside and settled him in the corner furthest from the damaged wall. "Stay here," I whispered. "I'm going to check if there's anything useful." The cabin was largely empty, abandoned long ago by whoever had built it. A rusted wood stove sat in one corner, rendered useless by the collapsed chimney. The remains of a wooden table and chair lay splintered on the floor. But against one wall, I found what looked like an old military footlocker, its metal surface covered in frost. Wiping away the ice, I discovered Cyrillic lettering stenciled on the lid. Собственность Министерства обороны СССР, property of the USSR Ministry of Defense. "Mikhail," I called softly. "Look at this." He crawled over, some clarity returning to his eyes as he focused on the unexpected find. "Military? Out here?" "Maybe it's connected to the theories about Soviet testing," I suggested, trying to open the locker. It was locked, the mechanism frozen solid. Mikhail pulled out his multi-tool and worked at the lock while I kept watch at the cabin's single window. Outside, the forest was still, the aurora's glow filtering between the trees, casting everything in an eerie blue-green light. "Got it," Mikhail murmured as the lock finally gave way with a brittle snap. Inside the locker were several items: a military-issue first aid kit from the 1950s, a heavy wool blanket that had somehow escaped the attention of moths, a flashlight with leaking batteries, and most surprisingly, a leather-bound journal. Mikhail grabbed the blanket, wrapping it around his shoulders while I examined the journal. It was weather-stained and worn, but still intact. Opening it, I found pages of handwritten Russian, the ink faded but legible. "It's a log of some kind," I said, flipping through the pages. "Dated February 1959. Mikhail's head snapped up. "That's when the Dyatlov incident happened." I nodded, scanning the entries. "It's from a military observer. They were monitoring something up on the pass." I turned more pages, reading quickly. There are references to anomalous energy readings and atmospheric disturbances. "What does it say about the hikers?" Mikhail asked, moving closer. I flipped to the final entries. They were tracking the Dyatlov group, not interfering, just observing. I stopped, the words on the page chilling me. They were using the students as bait. "Bait for what?" Mikhail's voice was barely audible. "For whatever comes through when the lights appear," I said, reading from the journal. "The entities require organic vessels for full manifestation. Previous attempts to capture specimens have failed. The university expedition presents an opportunity for observation of interaction and possible containment of manifested entities." Mikhail stared at me, horror dawning on his face. They knew what would happen to those students. I continued reading. Subjects fled shelter at 23:05. Interaction with entities in progress. Unusual atmospheric phenomena intensifying. Unable to approach safely for extraction or specimen recovery. Will report failure to contain manifestation. Recommend termination of Colot 3 project and immediate classification of all materials. "They just watched them die," Mikhail whispered. "And then covered it up," I added grimly. "These entities, whatever they are, the government knew about them." A creaking sound from above interrupted us. Snow and debris rained down as something moved across the cabin roof. That wet, clicking sound returned, now directly overhead. Mikhail and I froze, eyes fixed on the sagging ceiling. A dark stain began to spread across the wooden planks. Not water, but something viscous and oily that dripped down in thick globules. I grabbed the journal and shoved it inside my jacket. "We need to move. Now." The ceiling gave way with a tremendous crash. We lunged for the door as something poured through the opening. Not a solid entity, but a writhing mass of translucent tissue that flowed like liquid but moved with purpose. We burst out of the cabin into the snow, running blindly through the trees. Behind us, the mass flowed out the door, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape that pursued us with that same impossible speed. "The rules!" Mikhail gasped as we ran. "What do the rules say about fighting these things?" "They don't," I admitted. "Just how to avoid them." We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. I had lost all sense of direction, focused only on putting distance between us and the entity. "Wait," Mikhail said suddenly, skidding to a halt. "Listen." I stopped, straining my ears. Beyond our ragged breathing and the distant sounds of pursuit, I could hear something else, the mechanical growl of an engine. Snowmobile, I realized, coming from that direction. We changed course, heading toward the sound. It had to be Nikolai, perhaps coming to extract us early due to the approaching storm. If we could reach him, we might have a chance. The trees began to thin, and ahead, I could see a clearing, illuminated by the aurora above. A figure on a snowmobile was making its way across the open space. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms. "Over here!" The rider turned toward us, the snowmobile's headlight momentarily blinding me. Relief flooded through me. We were saved. Then Mikhail grabbed my arm, yanking me back into the cover of the trees. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "That's our way out." "Look at the driver," Mikhail hissed, his face pale with renewed terror. I peered out from behind a tree, focusing on the figure on the snowmobile. It was humanoid in shape, wearing what looked like appropriate winter gear. But as it turned its head searching for us, I could see that where a face should have been was only a smooth, blank expanse of flesh. "It's them," Mikhail whispered. "They're hunting us." The rider dismounted, moving with that same unnatural fluidity. It turned slowly in a full circle, as if scanning the forest edge. Then it did something that froze my blood. It raised a hand to its blank face and peeled away the featureless flesh like a mask, revealing a familiar human face beneath. Nikolai, but not Nikolai. The eyes were wrong, flat and empty, reflecting the aurora's light like mirrors. "Anton, Mikhail," it called, the voice a perfect imitation of our guide's gruff tones. "Where are you? Storm is coming. We must leave now." Rule 2 echoed in my mind. If you become separated, do not call out for others. They will not hear your real voice. "It's trying to lure us out," I whispered to Mikhail. "Don't respond." The thing wearing Nikolai's face continued to call, its voice becoming increasingly distorted with each repetition of our names. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit were growing closer. We were trapped between predators. "What do we do?" Mikhail asked, his voice trembling with exhaustion and fear. I had no answer. The rules had kept us alive so far, but they offered no guidance for our current situation. We were outnumbered, exhausted, and lost in an endless forest haunted by entities beyond human understanding. For the first time since we'd fled the pass, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that we wouldn't make it off this mountain alive. "We need to keep moving," I whispered, pulling Mikhail deeper into the forest, away from both the false Nikolai and the entity pursuing us from the cabin. "Downhill, always downhill." We crept through the trees, staying low, trying to muffle the sound of our passage through the snow. Behind us, the thing wearing Nikolai's face continued to call out, its voice distorting further with each repetition, stretching and warping until it no longer sounded human at all. The forest grew denser as we descended, the trees taller, their branches forming a canopy that partially blocked the aurora's glow. In the relative darkness, we moved more confidently, putting distance between ourselves and our pursuers. After what felt like hours of silent, tense movement, we paused in a small hollow formed by the massive roots of an ancient pine. Both of us were exhausted, our breath coming in ragged gasps that clouded the frigid air. "How far to the extraction point?" Mikhail asked, his voice barely audible. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. "We've been moving downhill for about 2 hours. If we maintain this pace, maybe another hour to the Auspaya River." Mikhail nodded, his expression grim in the dim light filtering through the branches above. The strange glow had faded from his eyes, but he looked terrible, face gaunt with exhaustion, frostbite marking his exposed skin in waxy white patches. "We should check that journal again," he suggested. "Maybe there's something useful, a way to fight them." I pulled out the leather-bound volume, using my body to shield the pages as I flipped through them. Most of it is technical observations, radiation readings, atmospheric conditions, but there are notes about the entities. I squinted at a particularly dense paragraph. Entities appear unable to fully manifest in temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius without an organic vessel, limited to transient forms that dissipate within 15 to 20 minutes of manifestation unless a host is acquired. Successful integration with host organism allows for prolonged presence in our dimensional plane. So they need bodies, Mikhail said. Living hosts. Seems like it. I turned the page. Attempted containment using electric field barriers unsuccessful. Entities display ability to disperse and reform. Physical weapons ineffective against non-corporeal manifestations. Extreme cold appears to slow movement, but not deter manifestation. Anything about weaknesses? Mikhail asked desperately. I scanned further, flipping pages. Here's something. Entities exhibit sensitivity to specific wavelengths of light. Standard military flares produce emissions that appear to disrupt entity cohesion temporarily. Mikhail's eyes widened. The emergency flares in our packs, which are back at our camp on the pass, I finished grimly. Wait, Mikhail said, reaching into his pocket. I grabbed something when we fled. He pulled out a small cylindrical object, a mini flare from our emergency kit. I always keep one in my jacket, hiking habit. Relief washed over me. That could buy us some time if they get close again. A distant screech echoed through the forest, followed by another from a different direction. They were still searching, still hunting. We should keep moving, I said, tucking the journal away. Stay ahead of them. We continued our descent, the terrain growing increasingly difficult as the slope steepened. Several times we had to catch ourselves on tree trunks to avoid sliding uncontrollably. The physical exertion kept us warm despite the bitter cold, but I could see Mikhail weakening with each passing minute. The trees suddenly gave way to a steep ravine, a frozen stream visible at the bottom. On the opposite bank, the forest continued. It was a natural obstacle, but also the most direct route down. We'll have to cross, I said, gauging the descent. Careful on the ice. Use the rocks for footing. We made our way down the ravine's edge, gripping exposed roots and rocks. At the bottom, the stream was frozen solid, moonlight glinting off its surface through breaks in the clouds. We stepped cautiously onto the ice, testing its strength. Halfway across, a glimmer of movement caught my eye. Upstream, something was flowing over the ice toward us. Not water, but that same oily, viscous substance we'd seen in the cabin. It moved with purpose, accelerating as it detected our presence. "Run!" I shouted, abandoning caution. We scrambled across the remaining ice and up the opposite bank, clawing our way through snow and undergrowth. Behind us, the substance reached the bank and began to flow up it, defying gravity, pursuing us with single-minded determination. The flare. We needed to use the flare. "Mikhail," I gasped. "The flare!" He fumbled in his pocket, his movements clumsy with cold and fatigue. The entity was gaining, flowing between trees with that impossible fluidity. Finally, Mikhail's hand emerged with the flare. "How do I—" "Twist and pull," I shouted. He did, and the flare ignited with a burst of intense red light. The effect on our pursuer was immediate and dramatic. The flowing mass recoiled as if struck, its substance fragmenting and dispersing like smoke in a strong wind. A high-pitched keening filled the air, painful to our ears. "It's working!" Mikhail exclaimed. But the flare wouldn't last long, 2 minutes at most. We needed to put as much distance between ourselves and the entity as possible before it regrouped. "Keep moving," I urged, pulling him forward. We ran through the forest, the flare's crimson light casting bizarre dancing shadows among the trees. When it finally sputtered out, we were deep in the woods again, no sign of pursuit behind us. But we weren't safe. The false Nikolai might still be searching, and there could be other entities nearby. We continued downhill, maintaining a grueling pace despite our exhaustion. The forest eventually began to thin, and ahead I could see what looked like a clearing. As we drew closer, I realized it was the frozen expanse of the Auspia River, our extraction point. We had made it. Except there was no sign of the real Nikolai. Just the vast, empty riverbed stretching in both directions, bordered by forests on either side. "We're early," I said, checking my watch again. "It's only 4:45 a.m. Nikolai wouldn't expect us until tomorrow." Mikhail sank down onto a fallen log, his face gray with fatigue. "We can't stay here in the open. They'll find us." He was right. The clearing offered no cover, and the aurora still danced overhead, painting the snow in shifting patterns of green and blue. We were exposed, vulnerable. "There," I said, pointing to a rocky outcropping near the river's edge. "We can take shelter there, watch for Nikolai." We made our way to the outcropping, which formed a natural alcove, protected on 3 sides by rock and open to the river on the 4th. It wasn't much, but it offered some concealment and protection from the wind. As we settled into our makeshift shelter, I noticed Mikhail shivering violently. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, and hypothermia was setting in. I moved closer, sharing body heat. "Just a few more hours," I said. "Nikolai will come at first light." "If he comes," Mikhail murmured. "If he's still alive." The thought had occurred to me too. If the entities could take human form, could mimic voices, how would we know if the real Nikolai arrived? And if these things had been here since 1959, who else might they be impersonating in Vijay, in Yekaterinburg, beyond? "We'll know," I said with more confidence than I felt. "We'll follow the rules." Rule 9 floated through my mind. If you survive until the final day, leave before noon. What comes down the mountain after noon is not what went up. It was technically already our final day, though not the one we'd planned. We needed to be away from this place by noon, regardless of whether Nikolai appeared or not. Mikhail's head drooped against my shoulder, his breathing becoming more regular as exhaustion pulled him toward sleep. "Stay awake," I said, shaking him gently. "It's too dangerous to sleep out here." "Just need to rest my eyes," he mumbled. "So tired, Anton." I knew the danger signs of hypothermia: confusion, drowsiness, slurred speech. Mikhail was displaying all 3. I needed to keep him awake, keep him talking. "Tell me about the documentary," I said. "What was your theory? About what happened to the Dyatlov group?" He stirred slightly. "Thought it was military testing gone wrong. Soviet experiment. Never imagined." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the sky where the aurora continued its eerie dance. "We'll have the real story now," I said. "The journal proves it. We can tell the truth about what happened." Mikhail gave a weak laugh. "Who'd believe us? Interdimensional entities that possess people. They'd lock us up." He wasn't wrong. Even with the journal as evidence, our story would sound like the ravings of madmen. And if the Soviet government had covered up the incident in 1959, the current Russian authorities might have similar motivations to suppress the truth. "We should destroy it," Mikhail said suddenly, his voice clearer. "The journal. Burn it. Some truths are too dangerous." I touched the leather-bound book through my jacket. "It's evidence, Mikhail. Proof that those 9 didn't die by accident." "It's a beacon," he countered. "As long as it exists, they'll be drawn to it. To us. Like they were drawn to the original research team. To the 9 students." Before I could respond, a sound caught my attention. The distant but distinctive growl of a snowmobile engine. I peered out from our shelter, scanning the tree line where the sound originated. "Someone's coming," I whispered. Mikhail tensed beside me. "Nikolai? Or one of them?" "We'll find out soon enough." The engine sound grew louder, and then a single headlight appeared among the trees. A snowmobile emerged from the forest, a solitary figure at the controls. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, the driver surveying the area. It was too distant to make out features, just a silhouette in the pre-dawn darkness. "We need to know if it's really him," Mikhail said, his voice tinged with fear. "Rule 2, I reminded him. "If we call out, it might not be his real voice that answers." The figure on the snowmobile reached into a compartment and pulled something out, what looked like a flare gun. It pointed the gun upward and fired. A bright orange flare arced into the sky, illuminating the clearing with harsh light. "It's a signal," I said. "He's looking for us." Mikhail grabbed my arm. "Or it's trying to flush us out." The flare slowly descended on its parachute, casting long shadows across the snow. In its harsh light, I could see the driver more clearly. He appeared human, dressed in the same winter gear Nikolai had worn. But at this distance, I couldn't be certain it was really him. "We need to make a decision," I said, watching as the figure began to scan the riverbank methodically. "Stay hidden, or reveal ourselves." Mikhail's grip on my arm tightened. "I don't think we have much choice. Look." I followed his gaze and felt my heart sink. Moving across the snow behind the snowmobile, barely visible in the fading light of the flare, were several flowing, shifting forms. The entities had found us. The entities were closing in from behind while the figure on the snowmobile continued scanning the area methodically. We were caught between potential threats with nowhere to run. "The flare," I whispered to Mikhail. "It affected them before. Maybe we can use it to reach the snowmobile." "That was our only flare," Mikhail reminded me, his voice tight with fear. The orange glow from the signal flare was fading, plunging the clearing back into the eerie light of the aurora. The entities were becoming more visible now, their translucent forms rippling as they advanced toward the snowmobile. "I don't think they've seen the driver yet," I said. "They're focused on us. They can sense us somehow." As if to confirm my suspicion, the flowing forms changed direction slightly, moving more deliberately toward our hiding spot. The driver remained oblivious, continuing to scan the opposite riverbank. "We have to warn him," Mikhail said. "Even if it's not really Nikolai, we can't just let those things take him." I hesitated, torn between self-preservation and the instinct to help. If we reveal ourselves, we're exposed. They'll reach us before we can reach the snowmobile. "Then we need a distraction," Mikhail said, pulling out the journal I'd given him to carry. "You said they're drawn to this, connected to it somehow." Understanding dawned. "You want to use it as bait?" He nodded grimly. "I'll throw it as far as I can away from the snowmobile. When they go for it, we run for Nikolai, or whoever that is." It was a desperate plan, but we had no alternatives. I peered out from our shelter, gauging distances. "Throw it toward those rocks on the far side. Then we sprint straight for the snowmobile. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." Mikhail tore a few pages from the journal, stuffed them in his pocket, then gripped the book tightly. "Ready?" I nodded, tensing to run. "Now!" Mikhail hurled the journal with all his remaining strength. It arced through the air, landing in the snow about 50 meters away with a soft thump. The effect was immediate and horrifying. All the entities froze, then changed direction as one, flowing rapidly toward the discarded book. "Run!" I hissed, shoving Mikhail ahead of me. We broke cover, sprinting across the open expanse toward the snowmobile. The driver spotted us immediately, standing up on the machine and waving frantically. "Anton! Mikhail!" he called. The voice sounded like Nikolai's, but I couldn't trust that. We were halfway to the snowmobile when I dared to glance back. The entities had reached the journal and were engulfing it, twisting around it in a frenzy of movement. But one had detached from the group and was now flowing toward us with terrifying speed. Faster, I gasped, pushing Mikhail forward as he began to falter. The driver of the snowmobile had pulled out a rifle and was aiming past us. A shot rang out, the sound shockingly loud in the frozen landscape. It had no effect on the pursuing entity, the bullet passing through its fluid form without resistance. 20 meters from the snowmobile, Mikhail stumbled and fell. I grabbed his arm, trying to haul him up, but he cried out in pain. "My ankle," he gasped. "I can't." The entity was almost upon us, stretching forward like a wave about to break. The driver fired again, cursing in Russian. Then he did something unexpected. He revved the snowmobile and drove straight toward us. As he approached, I could see his face clearly for the first time. It was Nikolai, his expression a mixture of determination and terror. He skidded to a stop beside us, the machine's treads throwing up a spray of snow. "Get on!" he shouted. "Now!" I helped Mikhail onto the seat behind Nikolai, then jumped on behind him, clinging to the metal frame. The entity was only meters away now, its form stretching upward into a towering wave of translucent tissue. Nikolai gunned the engine, the snowmobile lurching forward with a roar. We shot across the frozen river, the machine bouncing violently over the uneven surface. Behind us, the entity gave pursuit, flowing with that impossible speed. "What are those things?" Nikolai shouted over the engine's roar. "Just drive!" I called back. "Faster!" We raced along the frozen river, the entity gradually falling behind as the powerful snowmobile opened the distance. The other entities were still clustered around the discarded journal, visible now only as a distant disturbance in the snow. As we rounded a bend in the river, putting the clearing out of sight, I allowed myself to hope we might escape. But then, Mikhail tapped my shoulder and pointed upward. The aurora was changing, the gentle waves of light concentrating directly above us, forming a swirling vortex similar to what we'd seen on the pass. The snowmobile's engine began to sputter and die. "No!" Nikolai shouted, frantically working the throttle. "Not now." The machine coasted to a stop, its electronics completely dead. Above us, the vortex intensified, the light pulsing with increasing frequency. The air temperature around us suddenly spiked, becoming uncomfortably warm despite the winter landscape. Rule 6 flashed in my mind. If temperatures rise suddenly or unexpectedly, do not remove your clothes, no matter how unbearably hot it becomes. "Keep your gear on," I warned as Nikolai began to unzip his heavy jacket. "No matter how hot it gets, stay dressed." He stared at me uncomprehendingly, sweat already beading on his forehead. "What is happening?" "They're coming through," Mikhail said, his voice oddly calm as he stared upward. "Like they did in 59. Like they've been doing ever since." The journal pages he'd kept in his pocket were glowing now, a soft blue light seeping through the fabric of his jacket. He pulled them out, the paper covered in what had appeared to be standard Russian text, now shifting and changing before our eyes. The Cyrillic characters rearranging themselves into those same alien symbols we'd seen on the metal object. "It's a key," Mikhail murmured, seemingly entranced. "A formula. The military didn't understand what they'd found." The heat was becoming unbearable, the air shimmering around us. Nikolai was panting, his face flushed, but he heeded my warning and kept his clothing on despite the discomfort. "We need to move," I said, grabbing Mikhail's arm. "Get away from this spot." But Mikhail resisted, still staring at the pages in his hand. "I understand now," he said, his voice taking on that layered quality again. "Why they need us. They can't exist here in their natural state. Too solid, too cold. They need vessels." "Mikhail, snap out of it!" I shouted, shaking him. But his eyes had that glow again, reflecting the aurora's light with unnatural intensity. From the vortex above, something began to descend. Not the fluid entities we'd seen before, but a brilliant point of light that slowly expanded as it approached. It moved with purpose, directly toward Mikhail. "No!" I screamed, pulling him away. But he shrugged me off with that same unnatural strength he'd displayed before. "It's okay, Anton," he said, smiling serenely. "I want to understand too. Don't you? Don't you want to know what's out there, beyond our little world?" The light was almost upon him now, expanding to engulf him. I lunged forward, tackling him away from the descending entity. We tumbled across the ice, the journal pages scattering from his hand. The effect was instantaneous. The light swerved, following the pages as they blew across the ice. One page caught against a rock, and the light converged on it, enveloping it in blinding brilliance. "The river!" Nikolai shouted, finding his voice. "We must cross. Now!" He was right. We needed to put distance between ourselves and whatever was happening. The three of us scrambled across the frozen Auspia, heading for the tree line on the opposite bank. Behind us, more lights were descending from the vortex, converging on the scattered journal pages. "They're drawn to the writing," I gasped as we reached the shelter of the trees. "The symbols." "The Mansi legends," Nikolai said, his voice shaking. "They speak of spirits that came from the sky, hungry for human warmth. The elders said they were trapped in the mountain long ago, but sometimes found ways out." We continued through the forest, putting as much distance as possible between ourselves and the river. The unnatural heat had dissipated, the temperature dropping back to the brutal cold of the Ural winter. Eventually, we stopped in a dense copse of trees, collapsing with exhaustion. "What now?" Mikhail asked. The glow finally faded from his eyes. He seemed more lucid, though deeply shaken. "The snowmobile's dead." "We walk," Nikolai said grimly. "Vijay is perhaps 15 kilometers from here. If we move quickly, we can reach it by midday." Rule 9 echoed in my mind. If you survive until the final day, leave before noon. What comes down the mountain after noon is not what went up. "We have to hurry," I said, checking my watch. It was just after 6 a.m. "We need to be off this mountain before noon." "Why?" Nikolai asked. "Because after noon we won't be us anymore," Mikhail said quietly. "We'll be them, wearing our faces." I studied him, wondering if he was speaking from the influence of the entities or from his own understanding of the danger. Either way, he was right. We had less than 6 hours to reach safety, or we'd become vessels for whatever was breaking through from beyond. We set off through the forest, Nikolai leading the way with the confidence of someone who knew these woods intimately. Mikhail limped beside me, his injured ankle slowing our pace. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the aurora fading as sunlight approached. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this," Mikhail said as we walked. "You tried to warn me. The rules. I should have listened." "We're still alive," I reminded him. "As long as we keep moving, keep following the rules, we have a chance." But even as I spoke those words of encouragement, I couldn't shake the feeling that our escape was too easy. The vortex, the lights, the fluid entities, they had all seemed so unstoppable, so alien and powerful. Why had they been diverted by mere pages from a journal, unless they wanted us to escape, unless they wanted us to return to civilization? I thought of Rule 9 again, with a new, horrifying interpretation. What comes down the mountain after noon is not what went up. What if we were already carrying something back with us? Something waiting for the right moment to emerge? We reached Vijay at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before noon. 13 minutes before Rule 9 would have been broken. The tiny settlement looked unchanged, the few buildings huddled against the vast wilderness surrounding them. We stumbled into the Taiga Tavern, exhausted beyond words, our story spilling out in fragmented pieces that must have sounded like the ravings of madmen. No one believed us, of course. The official report would later state that we'd been caught in a sudden storm, suffered from hypothermia and hallucinations, that Mikhail's injuries were consistent with a fall, that our entities were simply the aurora borealis and extreme cold playing tricks on oxygen-deprived brains. Nikolai never spoke of what he'd seen. 3 days after our return, he left Vijay without a word to anyone. I sometimes wonder where he went, or if it was even him who left. Mikhail was hospitalized in Yekaterinburg for severe frostbite and exhaustion. I visited him twice before returning to my apartment. The second time, he didn't recognize me. He stared at me with blank eyes and asked why I was in his room. The doctors said it was a psychological response to trauma. I knew better. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've been researching, compiling what I know. The journal pages we kept have reverted to normal Russian text, the strange symbols gone as if they never existed. But sometimes, when the light hits the paper just right, I can see a faint blue glow beneath the words. I've noticed other things too. The temperature in my apartment rises suddenly, unexpectedly, usually at night. Objects move when I'm not looking. And sometimes when I pass a mirror, my reflection seems delayed by a fraction of a second, as if it's waiting to see what I'll do before mimicking me. They followed us home. Maybe not the entities themselves, but something of them. A seed, a spore, a fragment of consciousness waiting to grow. Yesterday, I called Mikhail's hospital room. A nurse answered and put him on the line. He spoke normally, asked how I was doing, said he was being discharged next week. Then he said something that froze my blood. I understand everything now, Anton. You should let me explain it to you, in person. I'll come to your apartment after dark. I hung up without responding. That wasn't Mikhail. Not anymore. Last night, someone knocked on my door at exactly 3:33 a.m. 3 precise knocks, then silence. I didn't answer. The knocking came again at 4:44 a.m., then again at 5:55 a.m. Each time I remained silent, hand on the shotgun I'd purchased after returning to Yekaterinburg. This morning, I called the hospital again. Mikhail had escaped during the night, they told me. No one knew how he'd managed it with his injuries. Police were searching for him. They won't find him. Or rather, they won't find what they're looking for. Mikhail's body might be walking around Yekaterinburg, but Mikhail himself is gone. Now they're knocking again, harder this time. Multiple fists pounding on my door. I can hear voices calling my name. The building manager, police officers, and Mikhail, all asking me to open up, to let them help me. But their voices aren't quite right. There's that same layered quality, that harmonic overlay I heard on the mountain. And beneath their words, almost too faint to detect, I can hear singing. I've barricaded the door, but it won't hold much longer. The window is my only escape route, 60 floors up. An impossible choice. As I sit here, shotgun across my lap, I realize there was a 10th rule we never discovered. Perhaps the most important one of all. Some truths should remain buried in the snow. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. They're breaking through now. The door is splintering. I hope someone finds this record. I hope they believe. And I hope they never ever go to Dyatlov Pass.